in Blender. And in today's tutorial, I'll be showing you guys how to model a simple house from start to finish. So first of all, what you see in your Blender is this cube here. And I'm going to show us how to navigate around our Blender, how to zoom in and orbit our screen, how to rotate and pan our 3D windows also. So this space here is called our 3D windows, and this space here is called our manipulation tools. All this, we have our select tool here, we have our cursor tool, we have our move tool, we have our rotate tool, and we have our scale tool. Okay, now let's just go dive into our 3D modeling straight. So we are modeling a simple house. First of all, we can left click on an object in Blender in this windows here. So if you left click, you can select this cube. I can left click on this camera. I can also left click on this light here. And to zoom in and out your screen is to hold Control and middle mouse button. So you can zoom in and out your 3D windows. And if you scroll your mouse, your center mouse button, you can also zoom in and out. So now to rotate your screen is very simple. You have to use only your middle scroll button and try to rotate your hands, and this helps you orbit your 3D windows. And to move your 3D windows, you have to hold shift and your center scroll button to move your 3D windows either upwards or downwards or sideways. Okay, so that's for navigating around 3D windows basically. And let's go straight into modeling properly. So I'm going to left click on this cube, and I'm going to say S to scale, which is the shortcut key. S to scale, we say G to grab an object, and arrow to rotate. So always take note of that: arrow to rotate, S to scale, and G to either move or grab an object. So I'm going to right click, so this come back to that center point of origin. So I can select this and say S on my keyboard to scale, and X on the X axis. So I'm scaling on the X axis. This red line on our grid denotes the X axis, and the green line denotes the Y axis, and the blue line denotes the Z axis. So I'm going to scale once again on my Y axis. I'm going to select the box by left clicking on it and say S to scale, and Y on the Y axis. So I'm scaling my cube to this point here, and I think this is okay. So I want to go to the edit mode. To activate the edit mode is very simple. You can come to this point that we have object mode, because the mode that we are in is called the object mode. So if I click tab on my keyboard, that's for edit mode. So that's a shortcut key for edit mode. And if I click tab again, I am back to the object mode. So if I come to this point that I have object mode and click on this arrow facing downwards here, so our mode editor comes up. So we have choices of selecting either the edit mode, sculpt mode, vectors paint, and weight paint. But in this tutorial, I'll be working with the edit mode. So I'm going to select the edit mode. So we are right in our edit mode. And what we should take note in our edit mode are what we call points, edge, and vertices. This is a point. This is a point. So 2 points makes one edge. So this is a point. It's called a vertex also. If I hold shift, I can select multiple vertices. And if I click one on my keyboard, that's for vertex selection. If I click two on my keyboard, that's for edge selection. So these are edges. These are an edge. These are an edge in a mesh. So these are an edge. These are an edge. So what we have again is what we call faces. If I click 3 on my keyboard, or I come to this place here, this for face selection. So this first one is for vector selection. I can Windows drag to select multiple vertices also. So this second one is for edge selection, and the third one is for face selection. Why the shortcut key for those selections: for vector selection, 1 on your keyboard for vector selection, 2 on your keyboard for edge selection, 3 on your keyboard for face selection. So these are my move tool and my manipulation tool. So I have my move tool here first, I have my rotate tool here, and I have my scale tool. So I'm going to use my move tool. I can select this face and push upwards, looking like this. So I'm going to add what we call loop cut. Can take this upward a little bit, loop cut. So to add a loop cut to your mesh, Control arrow on your keyboard is the shortcut key to add a loop cut. So I'm going to left click. If you left click once, you have a chance to move this loop cut to any place you want. And I'm going to right click, so it's going to be at the center. So I have my loop cut at the center here. So you can add multiple loop cuts also. If I say Ctrl Z to undo that, and then I say Ctrl arrow again to add the loop cut. So if I scroll my mouse, center scroll button, I have the chance to increase numbers of loop cuts. And if I scroll it downwards, I have the chance of reducing the loop cut. So I'm going to scroll it downwards to 1, and I'm going to left click and left click again to activate that. So in my edge selection, I'm going to select this edge first of all, and I'm going to push this upwards to this point, which is okay for me. And what I'm going to do next is very simple. I'm going to say 3 on my keyboard for face selection. I'm going to select this face. I'm going to push this a little bit. I can say E to extrude that face to this point. So to extrude the region is E on your keyboard to extrude. So I'm going to say 2 for my edge selection. I'm going to select this edge. I'm going to push this downwards, looking like this. So we're just creating a simple house basically. I'm going to say 3 for face selection again. I'm going to select this face. I'm going to hold shift. I'm going to select this face. I'm going to hold shift again and still select this face. So what I want to do is very simple. I want to create something like a roof for our house here. So I'm going to do shift D to duplicate an object or a face. So I'm going to do shift D and right click to release that, and I will say P to separate, and I'm going to select selection. So if I select that, if you come here on our scene explorer, we see that we have cube 1. First we have this cube here, and we have cube dot 0.001. That means that there is a new object in our scene. So I will say tab back to object mode. So I can select this also and come to my manipulation tool, and I can move this. So this now is single object. I'll do Ctrl Z back, and I'll select that, and I can say F2 on my keyboard. I can come here or in my windows here and say F2 to rename, and I can call this roof and say enter. So I'll say tab, and I'll say A to select all, and I'm going to extrude this, and the shortcut key to extrude is E on your keyboard. So I will do E on my keyboard to extrude. So I can right click and extrude uniformly on the Z axis, looking like this. So what I want to do now, I'm going to select these faces here, hold shift, select this face, and I'm going to say E again to extrude that face. I'm going to select this face also and this other face, and I'm going to say E to extrude this face. So our house is beginning to have some shape also. I'll select this face, hold shift, select this other face, and say E to extrude. I'm going to select this face. I can hold control and select this other face, so I can select all the face in that line, and I'll say E again to extrude on the Y on the Z axis. So I have my rooftop here. So if I click on this eye here, this eye sand, I can hide on hide an object. So I can say tab again back to my object mode. I'm going to come to where I have overlays. I'm going to click on overlays, and I'm going to go to geometry. In my geometry, I'm going to activate wireframe so I can see my edges properly. So I have a simple house here. So what I want to do now, I want to add a floor ground to this house. So I'm going to bring in a plane. So to add an object into your Blender scene is very simple. The shortcut key is Shift A on your keyboard, or you can come to this place that we have add and click on add. So the add menu comes up. We're going to go to mesh, click on mesh, and let's select plane. So we have our plane in there, as we can see. So our plane is very small. So I'm going to scale that plane. I will say S on my keyboard and kind of drag my mouse downwards to scale. So now I want to come to my front orthographic view. On your number pad keyboard, you can click on 1 for your front view. You can click 3 for your right orthographic view here, and you can click 7 for top view. So I'm going to say 1 on my notepad keyboard for my front view. And if you watch, this plane is lying on my grid here on the x-axis. So I'm going to select this and select this roof. So I'm going to hold Control while in the Scene Explorer and select this roof, and I'm going to push this upwards. So I want this house to be on top of my ground floor. So I'm going to select that plane and say F2 on my keyboard to rename that plane. I can call this ground and enter to rename that. So I can select this cube here and say F2 again and rename it as house and say enter. So in a house now, so what we need, I can select this and scale this S to scale. So this is the front of the house here, and I'm going to just do something very simple. I'm going to bring in an object again to create the windows. So what I'm going to do is that so you can rotate your screen to this point, and you can hold shift and control to move this cursor. So if I bring my cursor to this point here, it means that when I add an object, the object is going to come to where my cursor is. So I will say shift A and I'll go to mesh and I'll bring in the cube. And if you watch, the cube is directly at where my cursor is. I'm going to say S to scale and X to scale on the X axis. I'm going to scale that cube, and I'll say S and Z to scale on the Z axis. So I have something looking like a window here, and I can say X and Y to scale on the Y axis. I can push this forward here. I can say tab for edit mode. I can select this face. I can say I to insert this face. So to insert a face is I on your keyboard to insert a face. And I can say E to extrude that face inwards. I can say tab. I can select this and push this inwards a little bit. So I have something looking like a window here. So we can also still make some few adjustments also. We can say shift D, go to mesh and bring in a cube again and say S and X to scale on the X axis, X and Z to scale on the Z axis. We can say S and Y to scale on the Y axis. I can push this forward to see how it looks like. I can say S and X to scale on the X axis, and X and Y again to scale on the Y axis. I say X and Z to scale a little bit. You can say 1 on my keyboard for my front view, or you can say 3 for your front view, but you're working on this side. So you can rotate our screen to this point and we can push this upwards. You can say X and Z. So you have something looking like this, so I can push this inside. So if I say Ctrl 3 on my keyboard, that is for my right view. Ctrl 3 on your keyboard, so we can come to our right view. I can say tab for edit mode. I can also say Alt Z for wireframe mode, and 1 on my keyboard for vertex selection, so I can see through that object. So I can now push this. I can say Alt Z again for my viewport mode. I can say tab, and I can say shift D to duplicate. I can duplicate this, shift D to duplicate. So I want something very simple. I can hold shift and select this and say shift D to duplicate. Right click to release, and I can push this to this point here. So we can also still play around this also too. You can say I can select one of these and say shift D to duplicate. Right click to release, S and Z to scale on the Z axis, and X and Y to scale on the Y axis. So I can say Ctrl 3 again on my keyboard for my left view. So I'm going to bring this to this point. I'll say tab for edit mode, Alt Z. I can say A to select all. So I'm going to bring this at the center. I'm going to select those vertices. Like I said, one for vertex selection. So I can say or Z back and say tab. So I can push this at the center. I can say Shift D to duplicate, right click to release, and I can bring this to this point here. I can do Shift D again to release, or Shift D to duplicate, right click to release that. So we can say arrow to rotate just to give this some kind of deformed shape. You can select this and say arrow to rotate a little bit. You can rotate to this point, arrow to rotate. You can select this and say arrow to rotate also. So I want to just make this kind of looking zigzag, arrow to rotate, and arrow to okay, I won't rotate that, so I'll leave it this way. So I can now, so this is basically the window, which is looking very simple. So I can select all these also, hold shift to select all, to select multiple objects, and I'm going to say shift D to duplicate this. So I can now move this on the x-axis to this point. So what I'm doing now, I'm going to mirror this. I'm going to say right. I can also say arrow on my keyboard, Z on the z-axis, and I can say 270, or I can say arrow and Z and say 180 to rotate by 180 degree on the z-axis. Arrow Z and you click 180. So I can now push this inwards to this point. So I have my two windows here. So now I can now create the door also. I can also select this also and just make some few tweakings and select this and say Shift D to duplicate, right click to release. I'm going to push this here and I'm going to rotate this also. I can say arrow Z 90, no, arrow Z 180. But if you watch, it's rotating this other way. So I can do Ctrl Z back. I can say arrow Z 270. So I'm rotating at an angle of 270 on Z axis. So now I have the privilege to just make some adjustments also. So I can decide to scale this. I can say tab to select all and say A to select all. Tab for edit mode and A to select all. I can say X and X to scale on the X axis and X and Z to scale on the Z axis. So I can push this inwards also, which is good. I can say X and Z, S and Z. Say tab. So I have two windows here. So I can now create the door also. But before I create the door, I'm going to create another cube. So now I want to align my cursor to the middle of this grid here. So I'm going to say Shift S and I'll say cursor toward origin. So my cursor now will be at the center of the grid. So I'll do Shift A again to bring in an object. I'm going to go to mesh and bring in a cube. I'm going to say S to scale the cube and S and Z to scale on the Z axis. I'm going to say S again to scale the cube. So what I want to do is that this will just be basically like a something that's looking like a step. So I can select this and push this down the plane as the ground floor. I'm going to push it down. So it's going to be like this also, which is nice. This is nice. Okay, so this is good for me. I like this. So I want to create the windows, which is the door, which is very simple. I can hold shift and right click at the center of this cube here, and I'll say shift A. I'll go to mesh and I'll bring in a cube also, and I'll push this cube on the y axis, S and y to scale on the y axis, and x and x to scale on the x axis, just looking like a door, and x and z just to reduce the size. I can say 3 on my keyboard for my right view. I'm going to push this on the y axis and bring this down, say x and y to scale on the y axis. So I just have something looking very simple for the door here. So I can decide to widen the door, x and x here, x and z, scale on the z axis. So this will be for the door. So I can also make some tweakings on the door. So I can say, I can select this and say tap for edit mode. I can say 3 for face selection. I can select this face here, and I can say I. Instead of me saying I to insert, I can, if I click slash on my keyboard, I can hide every other object except this object, so I can work on this object properly. So I can be so creative about this for the door. I can say Control arrow to add a loop cut like this, and Control arrow to add a loop cut like this also. I can say 3 for face selection. I can select this face, select this face, select this face, select this face by holding shift. I can say I to insert those faces. I can say I again to separate those insertion. So I have something looking like this now. So I can now say E to extrude, E to extrude forward, and I can say S to scale that, but I don't think I'll scale it. I'm going to just push it inwards a little bit, so I can either push this inwards also, which is nice if that's inwards. So this could be my door. I can also select also, and I can say I to insert again, and I can say E to extrude outwards. So I can select this and say S to scale, and say S to scale. I can select this and say S to scale. Just give us that bevel, and select this and say S to scale, and say S to scale. So if we don't want to use that to scale each other, so I can do Ctrl Z back. So there are different ways of doing that. I can select this also, hold shift, select all this, so I can bevel this face here. I can say Ctrl B to bevel, and I can increase loop cut also. If I scroll my mouse, I can increase numbers of loop cuts also and reduce. So I can leave it this way, say tab. So we have something looking like this. But I'm going to prefer, I will do Ctrl Z, and I'm going to prefer the former. I'm going to select this and say S to scale, and say S to scale, select this and say S to scale, select this and say X to scale, and say tab. So this is basically just how to create a simple door in 3D Blender. So we can push this inside, inwards. So I can hold shift and bring this to this point here, bring my cursor to that point. So I have something looking like this, which is just basically simple how to create a simple house. I can say shift S and say cursor to world origin. So we've come to the end of this tutorial of how to model a simple house. So you can try this at your convenience. So we can decide to select all these and select all of them, hold shift to select. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to join all these objects to become one, and I'll say Ctrl J on my keyboard to join. And if you watch now, they are now one object. So I'll say Ctrl Z to undo that. So I can say F2 and I can name this window 1. Window 1. Say enter. So you can do that for this other one. So you can select this and say F2. I can call this a door, which is very simple. So thanks for watching. Please kindly subscribe, like, follow my YouTube channel.